How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to take a look at this next northeast snowstorm that could bring over a foot of snow over many areas of the northeast, where we do see, based on the latest run of the European model by the Sunday, January 7th timeframe, look at how large the area of snow is. This is encompassing areas like Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and eventually the coastal northeast cities as well, where Philadelphia gets involved. New York City gets involved with very heavy snowfall. Look at the dark shades of blue. This is extremely heavy snowfall rates, which could be in excess of 1 inch per hour if the European model's forecast was correct. And we do see heavy snowfall right around the Boston area as well, and southern New England gets impacted pretty hard as there's enough cold air to support for snowfall over the northeast, including the coastal northeast cities. And we see that this storm is powerful enough to dump a heavy amount of snowfall with a millibar pressure of 987 millibars. That could be equivalent to hurricane when it comes to millibar strength, and that certainly is powerful enough to bring a high amount of snowfall over a large area of the northeast. And we do see this impacts pretty much the entirety of New England, as is just a very powerful snowstorm that has recently developed based on the latest runs of the computer models. And we do see that this is bringing a heavy amount of rain over the southeast as well. Now, to take a look at what is going to be the main catalyst that'll develop this storm system. So this storm system will originate from a trough coming off the west coast. There's going to be a decent amount of cold air behind it. However, what's interesting is that the European model now expects a strong amount of ridging just to the east of this storm, which will be the main catalyst that would steer this to the north. And if you remember in my previous forecast, this low pressure system was originally just expected to move due east rather than take a northern track. And I said in that video that the computer models at the time were expecting a strong amount of ridging that would be able to steer this northward and bring the potential of a snowstorm to the northeast. However, of course, that has changed. The ridging is strong enough to steer this low to the north, and that is allowing the instability to enhance because there is plenty of cold air behind this low, and it's going to bring a strong southerly flow to enhance the convective activity. This very warm Gulf Stream water is definitely going to contribute to the air being able to hold a lot more water vapor for a lot more convective activity to develop, and the instability to enhance thanks to this ridge that's going to force the warm air to interact with this very cool air mass just to the west of it. Now, of course, there's still uncertainty with the forecast. The big uncertainty is how far north or south this will move. It seems more likely that there's at least going to be some sort of snowstorm in the northeast. I could say I'm fairly confident that somewhere in the northeast you'll experience snow, and potentially major snow, I'll say, is more likely as well. The question is where exactly that the area of snow will be. Right now, the European model is expecting this low to be sort of an I-95 type storm. And what I mean by that is that if you're just to the southeast of the Interstate 95 corridor, anywhere between Washington, D.C. and Boston, then you're less likely to experience major snowfall, if any snowfall at all, at least if the European model's case was correct. But if you're just to the northwest of the Interstate 95 corridor, that's where you should expect the major snowfall and primarily a snow event for you guys if the European model scenario was correct, which again is still has yet to be seen. Look at the forecast hour I'm going at, 138 hours out. So the key will be how strong the ridging will be just to the east of it and how far to the west this ridge will move. Let me show you guys the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast from the European model. And if we were to take a look at that, we're going to see a small trough move through, but there won't be enough ridging to steer this northward and close to the east coast for a major snowstorm to develop at least around Thursday timeframe. But this low will be our next potential major snowstorm for the northeast. We do see the ridging is strong enough. This would force the winds to move from more of a southwesterly direction to steer this low to the north. And what's interesting is that since this ridge is so strong, it's gonna enhance the instability enough for this low just behind the main low to intensify a little bit more. And we see a track that's more like this rather than like this, like the GFS model is forecasting. Let me actually show you guys the GFS model for context to show you guys what the GFS model is forecasting. And so let me show you guys first the GFS model's precipitation forecast. So when it comes to the GFS model, the GFS model is expecting the snow to be a lot further southward, and this is because the GFS model expects the ridging to be a lot weaker, so the snowfall is in fact more focused in right over the mid-Atlantic. Let me show you the 18Z run. This is the most reliable run, and we do see that the 18Z run is showing that the heaviest snowfall will actually occur a little bit further southward, focusing in more on Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City still gets involved, but not necessarily as much as what the European model is forecasting. And we see that this is mostly a snow event for the Interstate 95 corridor. This isn't like the European model where the rain is a little bit too close to the Interstate 95 corridor to the point where cities like Washington, D.C. and Baltimore would see a little bit more rain in a scenario like that. In this scenario, it's mostly a snow event for the Interstate 95 corridor cities, but New England doesn't get involved since the track is, or at least less involved because the track is further southward. And the reason being is that the GFS model doesn't expect the ridging to be as strong just to the east of it. So if the ridging ends up being a little bit stronger, then you should expect more of a European model scenario, while but if the ridging is a little bit weaker, expect more of a GFS model scenario where it should be more of a snow event for the coastal northeast cities, especially further southward, closer to Baltimore and Washington, D.C. But it shouldn't impact New England as much in that scenario. So let me compare the 500 millibar height anomaly between the GFS and the European model, and showing you guys the GFS model's forecast. We see that the ridging is definitely weaker than the European model, and that allows this low to take a track further southward and this second low to not strengthen as much, which means that it'll take a track a little bit further southward but would be a little bit weaker thanks to the lack of instability, because with a stronger ridge comes more warm and a more warm and moist environment that'll interact with the very cool Arctic air mass that's associated with this low. And if the ridge is weaker, then we should expect a weaker storm, but the snow to be further southward. So the key thing we're going to need to pay close attention to over the next few days is this ridge. If it's a bit stronger, then expect the more snow to be a little bit further northward, and the cities like Baltimore and Washington, D.C. especially to experience more of a rain event. And I can include Philadelphia in this as well, where you likely wouldn't experience major snowfall in the European model scenario. But if the GFS model is correct, then you should expect the opposite, where it should be a major snow event for the areas further southward. So definitely pay close attention to this over the next few days over those areas, and we won't get a good idea of how strong the ridging will be, I'll say, until the Thursday to Wednesday time frame. Once this ridge and this low actually move ashore right up along the western portion of North America, that's when we'll get a good idea of the strength of this ridge and as a result the trajectory of this storm system. So I'll definitely keep you guys updated over the next several days. So let's say if the GFS model scenario was 100% correct, there's the amount of snowfall you should expect over the northeast, and we clearly see that the heaviest snowfall is focused right in over Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, where you would experience over a foot of snow in this scenario. However, I want to point out that for a forecast like this and for a storm system like this, it's fairly rare for the snow forecast to be this far south. I expect we're going to see a trend a little bit further northward, so it's less likely that Washington, D.C. and Baltimore will experience a major snowstorm out of this. It's still certainly possible, but from what we typically see with storm systems like this developing in this sort of fashion and moving this sort of direction, the computer models always seem to trend a little bit later during the forecast once the forecast becomes more accurate further northward. So I do expect that this for Baltimore and Washington DC, this will be less snow than what you see right here, but we can't rule out the scenario. The forecast is still uncertain. For areas north of Philadelphia, I'll say, you certainly could still be in for, I'll say it's more likely you'll be in for a major snowstorm. Thanks to the position of this storm, it seems like this storm won't necessarily take a track like this where it'll move just off the northeast coast. It seems, or what's it called? It's like it wouldn't take a Miller A type storm system track where it'll move up the east coast. Rather, it'll take a track more like this. And during storm systems like this, it's definitely a bit more less likely for the major snowfall to focus in more on Washington DC and Baltimore, because of a storm system track like this will typically bring more warm air to those cities and bring more snow to cities like New York City and anywhere pretty much just north of Philadelphia. So I do expect the snow area to be focused in a little bit further northward up the Interstate 95 corridor. But again, still highly uncertain forecast, so I'll keep you guys updated. So in terms of the European model snowfall forecast, which I do believe is going to be the forecast that's a little bit more accurate, we see that this is still a fairly extensive and significant snowstorm for many areas of the Northeast. We clearly see that Boston would get involved with over a foot of snow. New York City, right around 6 to 12 inches. Philadelphia is right on the border between receiving no snowfall to potentially 6 to 12 inches. So it could be another one of those very close forecasts if you live right up along the northeast coastal cities. And Baltimore and Washington, D.C. still experience over 6 inches of snow in this scenario. However, it's going to be I still find it a little bit more difficult that the snow will move that far southward, but still keep this in mind. I do believe a major snowstorm is likely at least somewhere in the northeast, but we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to how strong the ridging will be as we approach this weekend, because that will be key in determining how much snow you'll receive. So now I'm going to forecast the possibility you'll receive snowfall in each state and when you should experience potential snowfall. So you guys get a better picture of the idea of the exact forecast for your area. So let's first start with the region between West Virginia, Kentucky, and Virginia. So if we were to continue to move forward with the forecast,